Good morning. Well, I'm here again. Is there among you anyone in need, a member of your community, in any of your towns, within the land that the Lord your God is giving you? Do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward your needy neighbor. You should rather open up your hand, willingly lending enough to meet the need, whatever it may be. Be careful that you do not entertain a mean thought, thinking, the seventh year, the year of the remission, is near, and therefore view for your needy neighbor with hostility and give nothing. Your neighbor might cry to the Lord against you, and you should not incur guilt. Give liberally and be ungrudgingly when you do so, for as this account, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in all your undertakes. Since there will never cease to be some in need on the earth, I therefore command you, open your hand to the poor and needy neighbor. Good enough. Thank you. Well, just when you thought you were done with me. Oh no. Awe came upon everyone because of many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. Although you believed were together and had all things in common, they would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to meet as many as need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in their temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved.
Work as a chaplain at the Wenatchee Rescue Mission, which is a homeless shelter. And it used to be called the Hospitality House, so you might know it under that name, but now it's called the Wenatchee Rescue Mission. I've only worked there a short bit, but I've already heard so many heartbreaking stories of people wondering, or people feeling rejected and wondering why they feel rejected by churches, by people in our society, by people in this community. They are homeless, yes, and many are without access to health care and dental, and they are missing teeth, and their clothes might look ragged to others. Maybe their hair and their beard look a little disgruntled, and they're carrying everything they own, and it might be a little smelly to us. Some people, some of us, instantly judge them and write them off because of their appearance. Many of them have experienced terrible traumas, which have left them scarred both emotionally and physically. And many of them struggle with mental health illnesses, and many a combination of it all. And this is why they are there. When I asked Pastor Debbie about preaching in this series of bearing a Christian witness in a broken world, and she listed discrepancy of wealth as one of the topics, I knew instantly this is the one that I needed to preach on and tackle, because I see it directly every week. Working here and seeing how much this church has and gives has been an honor. And I'm so glad to be part of it, and I'm excited to be joining in the work that God is doing here in the overall ministry of this community. But then the next day, I go to the rescue mission, and I look around, and I wonder, is it enough? Could we do more Could I do more? And I think, yes, of course, there's always more to do, but then I become overwhelmed with all the issues and struggles that people are facing on a daily basis and wonder, how can we make a difference? How can I make a difference? Sometimes it feels like just too much to face, and it feels like there are no solutions, that this issue just seems to be getting worse every year. The wealth gap is getting bigger and bigger, and more people are struggling with homelessness. Like with many major issues, I believe there are various faithful ways we can see this theologically and practically. And of course, our theology will affect how we respond in practice, right? They go hand in hand, like how we live out our everyday life. So one common understanding of this discrepancy of wealth is that it is a result of a fallen world. This is what happens in God's abundant creation because of human sin and human self-centeredness. I think of passages like the one where a woman comes and anoints Jesus' feet with expensive perfume, and she gets questioned, why wouldn't she sell it and give it to the poor? Jesus responds, leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has performed a good service to me, for you always have the poor with you. You can show kindness to them whenever you wish, but you'll not always have me. I have heard these verses and this understanding can be just taken too far, right? I've heard people take this out of context and say that because we always will have the poor with us, that we don't need to give those to those in need. I mean, why give when no matter how much we give, there will always be people struggling with poverty? But I don't believe, and I think most of us don't believe, that is what Jesus meant here. Or I've heard people say, well, they have made life choices that have led them there, and now this is their punishment. When we hear that people are dealing with an addiction, with drugs or alcohol, or we hear that people refuse to take their medication to help with their mental health issues, I think our compassion meter just drops a little bit for them. But I know and I believe that this understanding is not helpful, that people are complex and complicated, and reducing them down to one issue is stripping away their humanity. Some people at the rescue mission are there because of being in a terrible car accident and not being able to work anymore. And it's difficult to live off the disability check. Another had her identity stolen and is still dealing with all of that, but her money has been taken away in the midst of it all. Another lost their house and all of their belongings in a fire. And some of these people have had terrible, life-changing events happen to them on a completely random basis. Things that could happen to anyone. We live in a fallen world where sin, destruction, and evil is rampant. And again, it can be overwhelming. But it is important to remember, it is important for me to remember that our calling in the midst of it all, this command to help others, is one of the most original commands that we have. God told Abraham back in Genesis 12 that I will make you a great nation and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. God's plan was to bless Abraham so that others would be blessed. God's blessing does not just stop at one person or group, but it continues. It has a ripple effect in our lives and the lives of others. And God has always been deeply concerned about the poor from the very beginning. Deuteronomy 15, God gave the command to the Israelites in the wilderness saying, if there is among you anyone in need, a member of your community, in any of the towns within the land that the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward your needy neighbor. You should rather open your hand, willingly lending enough to meet the need, whatever it might be. And I think some of us have become hard-hearted because we've been burned by people that we've tried to help. But this command is still to help others, not because it benefits us, right? It is because God has told us this. Further down the passage, God states to the Israelites, remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. and the Lord your God redeemed you. For this reason, I lay this command upon you today. The Israelites were once oppressed by the Egyptians, so they knew how it felt to suffer, to not live a life that they hoped for. God calls them to remember, so that they will intentionally help others. And I believe God calls us to remember how he has blessed us so that we can help others. And there have been consequences of not listening to these commands throughout the Old Testament. As we know, various prophets called on the Israelites, told them to stop oppressing the poor, including Isaiah. Isaiah says, "Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, to deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed people." Oppressing the people, the poor, was a major issue in the Old Testament and the New Testament, because this economic system was not what biblical law envisioned. The Jubilee legislation, for instance, mandated a system where nobody could accumulate too much wealth and where every family had land to support themselves. Even if they had to sell their land because of illness or drought, they got it back in the year of Jubilee. So with this idea, some people believe in this idea of economic redistribution as a way to solve this wealth gap that we live in. And this is another faithful perspective. This idea is seen and lived out in Acts. It states that all the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. And every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. Obviously, when I read that, I'm like, I don't know how to live like that, right? It's so hard to envision living like that now when Christianity as a religion is so big. There's so many of us. But in smaller ways, people have found interesting ways to live this out through intentional communities where people live together, cook together, and share their lives together. Or I had a friend who has this vision for an apartment complex where one level is going to be low-income housing and the other one is going to be normal housing. And the idea is that there'll be a mix of people with different economic circumstances living together as neighbors. Or I have a friend who has the Christian healthcare sharing system, where your monthly payment goes directly to somebody who has medical bills, and then eventually when you have a medical bill, it'll be paid by others. So there are many creative ways that people are living out this life of sharing. I'm unsure how these things are making differences, but I am hopeful that they are making differences. Something you may or may not know about me, before God called me to ministry in seminary, I was very passionate about public health. I originally got my degree in health science at Whitworth University, where I learned in the city of Spokane that with the wealth gap between communities, there's also a life expectancy gap. If you live in a poor neighborhood, your life is shorter than those who live in a wealthier neighborhood. At 18, this completely blew my mind, that poverty is killing people. That this wealth gap that we live in brings all types of issues into our society because people just don't have the same resources. But I think no matter how we see this theologically, as part of being in a broken world, or if there should be some type of system built to avoid people falling into poverty, like the year of Jubilee or sharing of resources, no matter where we stand, it is important to remember God's command of helping others. And I think an important question to ask yourself is what does that look like today? As you sit in the pews, what is your response? What does a Christian witness look like with this huge wealth gap that we live in? How do we help others in need? Going back to the wonderful people at the rescue mission, I have found that people desire to belong, but they don't always want more food or socks or money. They just want people's time. They want to connect. They want to be looked into the eyes of another person directly and be smiled at. We have all been created in the image of God, and this means we have been created with an innate sense of community. We desire to be with others and be seen and treated and respected with full humanity. I think being a Christian witness can be difficult to do. I fully name that, especially when we have what we feel like we have nothing in common with others that seem so different, that live their lives so differently and have had different life experiences. Honestly, starting at the rescue mission, I was nervous. Most of my chaplain training and experience has been in the hospital and in the military setting. So working at a homeless shelter was and has been completely different. And it has been challenging, but in other ways it hasn't been. It's been rewarding. These people love their families. These people want to tell me about their children and show me pictures of their grandchildren, and they love their pets. They desire to work and contribute to society and to give back in ways that they've been given to. They love yummy food and enjoy reading and creating arts and playing bingo. I had 30 people playing bingo with me on Friday. They love it. They are people, just like me and just like you. But I think it's something that we forget, right? So working there, I have found more things in common with people than I have ever imagined. But honestly, I would never have known that until I sat down and talked with them, spent time with them, and listened to them. I know it's difficult to see all these things when we notice someone walking on the street or sitting on the street, and they look like they're struggling with homelessness, and we're just driving by or walking by ourselves. I think our brain has this terrible habit of reducing a person to how they look. Instantly, again, write them off. But they are so much more than that. God has created each of them with dreams and hopes and desires and love and a purpose, just like everybody. But again, we don't always see that or hear that when people ask for money. We feel uncomfortable and try to avoid them or give them something and walk away quickly. No matter if we like to admit it or not, wealth is something that separates us. It separates us from each other and from others. My first couple weeks at the Wenatchee Rescue Mission, I actually joined the outreach team. And these people drive around all day and try to connect with people and provide them with food and water and sleeping bags and socks or anything that they might need. And so joining them, what shocked me the most is how much I didn't pay attention. They were driving around, and this team is pointing out people here and there, people living in trailers, people living in their cars, people in alleyways or around the corner. This team is constantly on the lookout, and I was oblivious to it all. To my untrained eyes, people have blended into the background. And it broke my heart that I didn't pay attention, that I haven't been paying attention to people. We have to intentionally train ourselves to find people and look them in the eye, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. And I'm not only talking about people who are potentially living on the street, but the people who come here in our own parking lot for the free little pantry. Or maybe it's a neighbor of yours or a coworker who could be struggling, who might be on the verge of losing their house, might be on the verge of having to lose their job. It's so easy to go about our day and forget about those around us that we don't know that well. They easily blend into the background of our lives. They are like the nameless extras in a movie. But they aren't, right? God knows each one of them by name and cares so deeply for each one of them. So I believe bearing a Christian witness in this broken world that we live in wealth gaps and extreme poverty includes being intentional each day. Remembering that the ways that God has blessed us and how God is calling us to bless others. And the best news is that we are not alone, right? There's great organizations in this community that we can partner with, that we can volunteer with. I've only been here since November, but I see it. I see God working here in this church. I see God working with the outreach team and at the homeless shelter. This outreach team and the homeless shelter are trying to welcome people directly. These people who have felt rejected by society, by church, by people. They're going out and welcoming them in, saying, I see you, I know you're here, and I care about you. So I wonder what that would look like for us as a church, to welcome people here. Because God is at work, and God is inviting us into that work to building his kingdom here. There's hope, and there are many ways to get involved. My prayer for me and for you, for us, is not to become complacent in our comfort, but for God to challenge us to see all of his people through his eyes, their humanity and beauty, and to care for them in life-transforming ways. Amen? Amen.